What no one tells you about the night everything changes is that it starts small. It starts with a broken heel on a wet sidewalk, a nearly missed bus, and a little girl sitting alone in the rain outside a hospital that closed its emergency wing 2 years ago. Hazel Beckett almost walked past her. Almost. The girl couldn't have been older than 7. She was sitting on the curb outside St. Augustine's, the old building, the one with the boarded-up windows and the rusted gate, with her knees pulled up to her chest and her shoes soaked through. No jacket, no umbrella. Just a pair of tiny fists pressed against her mouth, like she was trying to swallow the sound of her own crying. Hazel stopped. She was already 40 minutes late to her second shift at Lyndon's Diner. Her manager, Frank, had already texted her twice. She had exactly $11 in her wallet, a bus pass that expired at midnight, and rent due in 4 days. She did not have time to stop. She stopped anyway. Hey! She crouched down, ignoring the way the cold water soaked through her jeans at the knee. Hey, sweetheart, are you okay? The girl looked up. Her eyes were dark brown and enormous, the kind of eyes that made you feel guilty for every bad thing you'd ever done. There was a gash above her left eyebrow, not deep, but bleeding enough to have stained the collar of her white school blouse. I can't find my brother, the girl whispered. Hazel looked up and down the street, empty. The rain was picking up, the kind of cold October rain that didn't fall so much as materialize around you. What's your name? Piper. Okay, Piper. Where did you last see your brother? The girl pointed vaguely down the block toward the parking garage on Caldwell Street, the one that had been half under construction for the better part of 2 years. He told me to stay here. He said he'd be right back. Her voice cracked. That was a really long time ago. Hazel pulled out her phone and was about to dial 911 when the girl grabbed her wrist. No police, Piper said. The words came out with a certainty no 7-year-old should possess. Tobias said no police. Ever. Hazel stared at her. Who's Tobias, my brother? How old is your brother? Piper hesitated. Grown up. That was not an answer. But before Hazel could push further, the girl reached into the pocket of her soaked dress. A dress that, Hazel now noticed, was beautifully made, the kind of fabric that cost more than Hazel's monthly grocery budget, and pulled out a phone. A phone that was not a child's phone. It was sleek, matte black with no case and no lock screen photo, just a black screen and a single contact saved under a name that made Hazel's stomach drop. D. That was it. Just the letter D. Tobias said if something happened, call D, Piper said. He made me memorize it. He made me practice. Hazel looked at the phone, looked at the girl, looked at the empty street and the boarded-up hospital and the rain coming down harder now against the pavement. She called. It rang twice. Speak. The voice on the other end was not a greeting. It was a command. Low and even, and the kind of voice that did not raise itself because it had never needed to. A voice that had learned somewhere along the way that silence was more threatening than volume. Hazel's mouth went dry. Hi, my name is Hazel. I found a little girl. She says her name is Piper, and she has a cut on her head, and she's been sitting outside in the rain, and she gave me this number and told me to call. There was a silence on the other end that lasted exactly 3 seconds. Hazel counted. Where? Not a question. She told him the intersection. He hung up before she finished the street name. Hazel stared at the phone. Then she looked at Piper, who was watching her with those enormous dark eyes. Someone's coming, Hazel said, because it was the only true thing she had. Is it D? Piper asked. I think so. Piper nodded, and something in her tiny shoulders let go. D always comes, she said simply. They came in 4 minutes. 2 black SUVs, no plates, moving fast and quiet through the wet streets, like they'd been dropped there by a different set of rules than the rest of the city ran on. 6 men got out before the vehicles had fully stopped, and they moved with the practiced efficiency of people who were paid to stand between something valuable and the rest of the world. And then the back door of the second SUV opened, and the man got out. Dominic Vale was not what Hazel had expected, though later she would have trouble articulating what exactly she had expected. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair, sharp features, and the kind of controlled stillness that athletes and soldiers and dangerous men cultivated. He was wearing a charcoal suit jacket over a dark shirt, no tie, and he walked through the rain without hunching against it, like the weather had made the reasonable decision not to bother him. He crossed the sidewalk in long strides and dropped to one knee in front of Piper. The movement was so fluid and immediate that it startled Hazel, this man who looked like he'd been carved out of something cold and hard, kneeling on a wet sidewalk without a second thought about the suit. "Pip!" His voice had changed completely. Still low but warm now, worn in, like a different instrument altogether. He cupped the girl's face in both hands and turned her head gently to look at the cut. His jaw tightened. "I fell," Piper said quickly. "In the garage. There was glass, I know." He ran his thumb carefully along her hairline away from the cut. "Does it hurt? A little, or a lot?" She scrunched her nose. "A medium, okay." He stood, keeping one hand on her shoulder, and looked at Hazel for the first time. It was not a comfortable thing, being looked at by Dominic Vale. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless in the rain, and they moved over her with the methodical efficiency of a man cataloging a situation rather than a person. She felt assessed and filed in about 4 seconds. "You found her. She was sitting on the curb," Hazel said. "She'd been there for a while." "Alone?" "Yes." Something moved behind his eyes. "You called immediately?" "As soon as she gave me the phone, yes." He held her gaze for another moment. Then he looked at one of the men behind him, a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head who had not taken his eyes off the surrounding street since he got out of the car. "Garrett." "Car." Garrett nodded and moved to open the rear door of the first SUV. "Wait." Hazel started. Dominic Vale looked at her. "She needs a doctor," Hazel said. She kept her voice steady, even though something about this man made every instinct she had go very quiet and very alert at the same time. "The cut isn't deep, but she should be looked at. And she's cold. She's been sitting in the rain, for I'm aware of what she needs." His tone wasn't rude. It was factual in the way that a locked door is factual. "I'm sure you are," Hazel said. "I just wanted to make sure it was said." Another pause. He tilted his head slightly. "Get in the car." Hazel blinked. "I'm sorry. You're soaked. Your knee is bleeding." He nodded at her knee. She hadn't noticed, but when she looked down, she'd scraped it on the curb when she crouched down, and it had bled through her jeans. "Piper trusts you, which means I don't have to decide whether to trust you tonight. Get in the car. My doctor will see both of you. I have a shift. Get in the car, Miss Beckett." She hadn't told him her last name. The realization landed in her stomach like a stone. She got in the car. The house, if you could call it that, was in a part of the city that Hazel knew existed, the way she knew certain constellations existed. Abstractly, at a distance, as a concept rather than a lived reality. The building was old brownstone, wide and serious, tucked behind a wrought iron gate on a street that didn't appear on any rideshare map she'd ever opened. There were no visible cameras, which meant either there were no cameras, or there were so many that they'd become part of the architecture. She suspected the latter. Inside, it was warm. That was the first thing. Warm and quiet, with high ceilings and dark wood floors, and the particular stillness of a place that had a lot of doors and very few windows facing the street. A woman with silver-streaked hair, and the manner of someone who had been unflappable, for so long it had become biological. Her name was Agnes, and she appeared to run the house through sheer force of organism. Took Piper by the hand and led her upstairs before Hazel had properly registered that they'd arrived. A doctor came. He was 50-ish, with small glasses and quick hands, and he looked at Piper's cut and declared it clean and manageable, requiring only steri-strips and rest. He checked Hazel's knee without comment and handed her a bandage. Then he left. Hazel sat in a kitchen that was larger than her entire apartment and accepted the cup of tea. Agnes pressed into her hands and tried to get her bearings. Dominic Vale came in 20 minutes later. He had changed out of the wet suit into a dark sweater, sleeves pushed up, and he moved through the kitchen with the ease of a man who owned the room because he owned everything in a 3-block radius. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, set down a glass of water for himself, did not drink it. "Where's Tobias?" Hazel asked. It had been bothering her since the curb. "Piper's brother," she said. "He told her to wait." Something in Dominic Vale's face went very still. "Tobias is my younger brother," he said. "He's 22. He took Piper to a movie tonight without telling me, without telling you. I have protocols," he said, as if that explained everything. And perhaps in his world it did. They exist for reasons. Tobias is aware of those reasons. A muscle in his jaw moved. He was supposed to be back with her an hour before she called you. His phone is off. Hazel looked at him carefully. Do you know where he is? Not yet. Are you worried? The pause before his answer was very small and very telling. My brother makes bad decisions with some regularity, Dominic Vale said. I've been cleaning up after them for years. It's most likely that he's fine, and somewhere I'm going to be annoyed about. But, he looked at her. But Piper had a cut on her head and was sitting alone in the rain. Hazel nodded. She understood the weight of that, but. I'll need your phone, he said. She looked at him. The one Piper used to call me. It has my number on it. I'll return it in the morning. You could just delete the contact. I could. He didn't move. Your phone, Miss Beckett. She put it on the table. He picked it up and handed it to Garrett, who had materialized in the doorway the way these men seemed to do. Quietly, completely, like furniture that could track your movements. Agnes will show you to a room, Dominic said. You'll stay tonight. I wasn't planning to. You called that number, he said. And there was no harshness in it, just the flat weight of consequence. That means you're in my circle until I determine the nature of the situation. It's safer for you here than wherever you were going. Your manager at Linden's has been contacted. Your shift has been covered. Hazel stared at him. You looked me up. Before the car finished pulling out of that intersection. Yes, she should have been angry. She knew on some abstract level that she should have felt her privacy violated, her autonomy overridden. But there was something in the way he said it, not apologetic, but not cruel either. Matter of fact the way a weather forecast is matter of fact. This is what happened. These are the conditions. And if I'd had somewhere more important to be, she said. For the first time, something that wasn't quite a smile, but was adjacent to one moved across his face. I would have made arrangements. She slept in a room that had better sheets than any hotel she'd ever stayed in, and lay awake for an hour listening to the house breathe around her and trying to decide if she was a guest or a precaution. She decided she was probably both. At 2 a.m, she heard the voices. Not clearly, the walls were too solid for that, but the rhythm of them. Dominic's voice, low and controlled, and another man's voice, higher, rapid, defensive. And then Dominic's again, still low, and the particular quality of silence that follows a sentence that ends the conversation. In the morning, Piper appeared in the kitchen doorway at 7:30 wearing pajamas printed with small foxes and a starry strip above her eyebrow that she kept touching with 2 fingers. You stayed, the little girl said. I did, Hazel said. Piper climbed up onto the chair across from her with the focused determination of someone who had been warned not to run inside. Dee never lets people stay, she said. Is that right? He says. Piper lowered her voice conspiratorially, that most people want something, so he doesn't let them get close enough to ask. She considered this. I think you're different. Why's that? Piper shrugged with the elegant simplicity of a child who had arrived at a truth without being able to fully explain it. Because you didn't ask for anything. You just stayed with me in the rain. Hazel didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything. Agnes appeared and began making eggs, and the kitchen filled with the ordinary smells of butter and toast, and for a few minutes it almost felt like a normal morning in a normal house. Then Dominic came in, and Tobias was behind him. Tobias Vale was 22 and looked it, broad-shouldered like his brother but softer, with dark circles under his eyes and a split lip that had been cleaned and butterfly taped. He came in looking like a man who had survived something and also knew he was in significant trouble, which was a particular kind of exhaustion all its own. Piper flew off the chair and wrapped herself around his waist before anyone said a word. Tobias held on to her with both arms and squeezed his eyes shut. I'm sorry, Pip, he said into the top of her head. I'm sorry. You were really late, Piper said into his shirt. I know, I waited a really long time. I know. Hazel looked at Dominic. He was watching his brother and sister with an expression that was difficult to read, something between relief and the kind of anger that had been converted, through some disciplined internal process, into something cooler and more manageable. He noticed her looking. He looked back, and she knew in that moment that this wasn't over. Whatever this was, whatever had happened to Tobias that left him split-lipped and hollow-eyed, whatever it meant for Piper, whatever it meant for the world these people lived in, It wasn't over. It was, in the parlance of the stories she'd read as a kid, the end of the beginning. She found out why 3 hours later. Tobias had been at a meeting. Not his meeting. He'd walked into something he wasn't supposed to know about, in a parking garage 2 blocks from the theater, because he'd taken a wrong turn looking for a bathroom in a building that turned out to have significantly more floors than he'd realized. He'd heard a name, and the men who said the name had seen his face. They'd let him go, which was, as Dominic explained to Garrett and a third man named Sloan, in a study that Hazel was not supposed to be in, but had ended up in anyway because Piper had led her there by the hand and then fallen asleep on the sofa. Not a mercy. It was a message. They knew who he was, Dominic said. He was standing at the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the garden below. They let him walk because they wanted me to know they could have taken him and chose not to. This time, the name he heard, Sloan said. He was lean and precise, with the habit of tapping a pen against his palm when he was thinking. If it's who we think it is, then this is about the Kessler contracts. Yes. Sloan set down the pen. Then we have maybe 48 hours before they decide the message didn't land and try something else. Dominic didn't answer. He was still looking out the window. Then he turned, and his eyes landed on Hazel, who was sitting in the corner armchair next to the sleeping Piper and very sincerely wishing she were smaller. You heard that, he said. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. He crossed the room and stood in front of her, looking down. Tell me what you know about Raymond Kessler. I don't. I've never heard that name in my life. Think. I'm a waitress, Hazel said. I know what people order for breakfast. I know which tables tip and which ones don't. I do not know anything about. She stopped. Wait. Something had surfaced. Not a name. A face. An argument she'd overheard 2 weeks ago at table 9. A booth in the back that Frank kept for regulars who wanted privacy, which meant they weren't as private as they thought, because Hazel had been refilling the coffee station 4 feet away behind a half wall. 2 men. One of them had been loud, the way people get when they're trying to sound calm. He'd said something about papers, about a transfer that wasn't going to hold up, about someone finding out. And the other man, quieter, older, with a ring on his right hand that Hazel had noticed because it was so large it seemed impractical for a person who used their hands, had said, "Tell Kessler it's done. Tell him the girl doesn't matter anymore." Hazel felt the memory settle into the present moment with the weight of a very bad coincidence. She looked up at Dominic Vale. I think, she said slowly, that I might have overheard something I shouldn't have. The next 16 hours were not the kind Hazel would recommend to anyone. There was a conversation with Dominic and Sloan that lasted 2 hours and covered everything she could remember about the 2 men, the booth, the words, the ring. There was a sketch artist, an actual sketch artist, who showed up with a case of pencils and produced a remarkably accurate rendering of the man with the ring in under 40 minutes. There was a phone call Dominic took in the hallway that she wasn't supposed to hear and heard anyway, in which he spoke in short, flat sentences and then was quiet for a long time. And there was the moment, somewhere around hour 9, when she walked into the kitchen for water and found him standing at the counter with a glass of whiskey he wasn't drinking, looking at nothing. You should sleep, she said. So should you. I'm not the one running whatever this is. He looked at her. In the kitchen light, without the rain and the urgency and the controlled efficiency of crisis, he looked like a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had simply become too accustomed to the weight to put it down. Piper talks about you, he said. In the 3 hours she's known you. Hazel leaned against the counter across from him. What does she say? She says you have kind eyes. A pause. She says you stayed with her even though you were scared. I wasn't scared. He said nothing. Okay, Hazel said. I was a little scared. Of me, of the situation. She met his gaze. You're slightly terrifying, but that's different from the situation being terrifying. Something moved in his expression. Not the almost smile from before. Something quieter. Most people don't make that distinction. Most people don't sit in the rain with strangers' little sisters. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Hazel Beckett, 2026, works doubles at Linden's Tuesday through Saturday. Lives on Mercer and 5th, 3rd floor, the one with the window box. He said it without looking away from her. No family in the city. Moved here 4 years ago. Good at your job. Your manager Frank was annoyed when I called but said, and I'm quoting, that you were the only one he trusted to close without checking the drawer twice. Hazel stared at him. You memorized my file. I read everything once. That's invasive. Yes, most people would apologize for that. I'm aware. He picked up the glass of whiskey and set it down again without drinking. The man with the ring. I know who he is now. He's been feeding information to Kessler for 2 years, from inside my organization. A pause. He saw your face 2 weeks ago at that diner. The information arrived quietly and then hit hard. He'd recognize me. Yes, so I'm safe here, Dominic said, with a finality that closed the door on any argument she might have had. You're safe here. That's not negotiable. You don't get to decide what's negotiable for me. Someone already decided to put you in the radius of something dangerous, he said, and the quietness of it stopped her. They made that decision 2 weeks ago when that man sat down in your section. I'm correcting for it. He looked at her steadily. I protect what's mine, Ms. Beckett. You helped my sister. That makes this my problem to solve. Hazel held his gaze, tried to find the angle in it, the calculation. Couldn't. Okay, she said finally. Okay. She turned to go, got to the doorway. Hazel. She looked back. Frank said the window box was your idea, Dominic Vale said. The flowers, he said you started it because the block felt too gray. She had no idea why he was telling her that, but she thought, from the way he said it, carefully like he was handling something that might break, that he did. She nodded and went to bed. The man with the ring was named Gerald Fitch. He had worked for Dominic Vale for 11 years, moving money and contracts and information through channels that no one asked too many questions about, and he had been selling pieces of those channels to Raymond Kessler for the last 2. He had done it for the oldest and most human reason possible. He'd needed money, and Kessler had offered it, and he'd told himself the first time that it would only be once, and the second time that it was already done so. What was the difference? And by the third time, he'd stopped telling himself anything at all. Garrett found him at a hotel in Midtown. Dominic went himself, which Sloan advised against and which Dominic did anyway, because there were things he chose not to delegate. Hazel found out later, from Agnes in the kitchen, over cups of tea that had become their morning ritual by day 3, that the meeting had been brief, that Fitch had not tried to run, that Kessler had been given, through channels Hazel did not have the vocabulary to describe, a clear and unambiguous accounting of the consequences of further escalation. And, Hazel asked. Agnes poured more tea. Mr. Kessler is a practical man, she said, when practicality is made sufficiently clear. That was Agnes's way of saying it was over. Tobias appeared in the kitchen doorway. He'd been quieter since that first morning, moving around the house with the careful tread of someone who understood that he'd nearly cost more than himself, and looked at Hazel with the expression of a young man who had a lot of things to say and wasn't sure how to start. I'm sorry, he said, for all of it. Piper told me you stayed with her in the rain. He swallowed. She keeps talking about the rain. She was very calm, Hazel said. For a little kid in a scary situation, she's seen some things, Tobias said, with the particular sadness of someone who wished that wasn't true. She's learned to hold herself together. He looked at the floor. She shouldn't have had to learn that. No, Hazel agreed. But she did, and she's okay. He nodded. Because of you, because of herself, Hazel said. I just sat next to her. Tobias looked at her for a moment like that was either the simplest or the most complicated thing he'd ever heard, and then he got a glass of water and left. And Hazel sat with Agnes in the kitchen and felt the house around her settle into something that was almost comfortable. On the morning of the 4th day, Dominic told her she could go home. He said it in the front hallway, with Garrett already pulling a car around and Agnes having packed her a bag of food she hadn't asked for, and Piper standing on the 3rd stair in her fox pajamas refusing, on principle, to come down. You're okay to go, he said. Kessler's pulled back. Fitch is contained. No one's going to connect you to any of this. Hazel looked at him. And if they do, they won't. He said it the way he said most things, not to reassure, but because it was true, and true things were worth saying plainly. But if something changes, you'll know. How will I know? He held out her phone. My number's in there now. She took it, looked at the contact. He'd entered it the same way, just a letter. D. Original, she said. It works. She looked up at him. He was looking back at her in that way he had, assessing, cataloging, but there was something different in it now, something that was less about filing information and more about something she couldn't quite name. Dominic, Piper called from the stairs. She doesn't have to go. Pip, I'm just saying. I know what you're saying. Hazel looked up at Piper on the stairs, small and stubborn and clutching the banister, and felt something pull sideways in her chest. I'll come back, she said. She said it to Piper, but she didn't entirely mean it only for Piper. Dominic Vale said nothing, but he held the door open for her, which was, she was learning, his way. She walked out into a morning that was cold and clear, the city washed clean from the rain, and got into the car. She didn't look back. But as the car pulled away and she watched the brownstone recede in the window, she thought about what Piper had said. D always comes. She thought about a man who read everything once, and remembered a window box of flowers on a gray block. She thought about 4 days in a house with rules she didn't understand, in a world she had no map for. And she thought, not for the last time, that the night everything changes starts small. A broken heel, a missed bus, a little girl sitting in the rain. She looked down at her phone, at the single letter in her contacts. She didn't delete it. If this story got under your skin the way it got under mine, if you're already wondering what happens next between Hazel and the man who keeps a city in line but can't quite bring himself to say what's on his mind, hit that like button and subscribe to Ava's Romance Library. Drop in the comments, do you think Hazel goes back? And do you think Dominic Vale is going to let her stay gone? Because I have thoughts. And so do you. See you in the next one.